The Scottish Police Authority was set up to oversee Police Scotland independently of government. Last November, they reached a unanimous decision to reinstate the suspended Chief Constable, Phil Gormley. He was informed and press releases drafted announcing his return to work. Then, following 2 meetings with the Justice Secretary, the chair of the Scottish Police Authority changed his mind and emailed board members recommending the decision be paused. He also contacted Mr Gormley on his way back to Scotland at the time and told him not to come back. MSPs are concerned about political interference in the day-to-day running of the police. The Justice Secretary, Michael Matheson, insists he only asked essential and pertinent questions. So what happened in those unminuted meetings? Was the chair of the SPA made to change his mind? It all came under intense scrutiny at Holyrood this week, firstly in committee and then in Parliament itself.
Did the Cabinet Secretary tell you, either at that first meeting or indeed the second meeting, to change your mind?
No, it wasn't that explicit, no.
So why did you change your mind?
Well, as I said in my earlier answer, I think that for the Chief Constable to return, it would be best that it was in the most conducive situation possible. If the Cabinet Secretary was unhappy for reasons that I didn't understand, I thought it was best to try to resolve those issues before he returned.
The convener asked you earlier on, Mr Flanagan, whether you felt that the Cabinet Secretary was directing you to stop the process. Will you accept that if you look at that objectively, it's quite difficult not to conclude that you felt the Cabinet Secretary was telling you to stop this process?
I think direction is a more formal term, and I couldn't say that I had been directed to. But the position I was in, I felt I wasn't in a position to move forward with that decision.
So you felt you had no choice but to pause the decision?
Yes.
Thank you.
The SPA chair called it a one-sided meeting, and he said that he felt he had no choice but to reverse the decision of his independent board. I changed my mind based on the Cabinet Secretary being unhappy. So the independent chair of an independent body has 2 meetings with the Justice Secretary, where in the first he's told he's made a bad decision, and after the second he's left in no doubt that he has to reverse it.
Andrew Flanagan clearly said that he hadn't been requested by the Justice Secretary to change his decision, and he wasn't directed to do so. Questions were asked, and as I said last week and I repeat again today, I absolutely am of the view that the Justice Secretary was right to ask those questions.
Well, the Justice Secretary, Michael Matheson, declined our invitation to appear on the programme today. So earlier I spoke with the Conservative Justice spokesperson, Liam Kerr, and the SNP's Ben McPherson. Well, first of all, Liam Kerr, I'm curious as to what you make of these reports that were in the Sunday Post this morning, and I should just briefly explain what this is all about. Kate Frame, the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, suggested that the government was trying to interfere with her independence. It was about the publication of a report on the Phil Gormley affair. She claims that someone in the Scottish Government was trying to delay it. What did you make of that?
I find this extraordinary. These are absolutely extraordinary revelations. What they show is that government interference in supposedly independent bodies trying to do an independent job is endemic throughout the system. And what it also shows is actually there's a wider issue of government here, because of course we've seen John Swinney trying to interfere in the named person witnesses, or at any rate there are allegations of this. So what this is showing is that this interference with independent public bodies is endemic throughout the Scottish Government, throughout the SNP.
Well, Ben McPherson, what do you make of it? Because this is arguably more serious than the allegations about Michael Matheson, because Michael Matheson could say, look, I would have judged to be completely irresponsible if I hadn't interfered in the timing of Phil Gormley's supposed return, given the circumstances surrounding it. This looks much more, on the face of it, if these emails are accurate, like a straightforward case of the government trying to interfere in the normal day-to-day workings of someone who is supposed to be an independent commissioner.
I think on issues important like this, it's important to be rational and reasonable. And I think this is a story that's broken this morning and there hasn't been any parliamentary time or otherwise to look at it. But what's absolutely clear from the story in the Sunday Post and the statement made by the Park is that no incidents of government interference have taken place. Those are the Park's words rather than mine. Now, I think context is important here. This wasn't
only
ministers.
because she resisted. Let me just read you what Kate Frame, the Police Investigations Review Commissioner, said. She said, if these emails are accurate, my perception of your remarks is of governmental interference with my independence. That's a direct quote.
So that was correspondence to give the context with a government official, as far as I understand it, from the Sunday Post story today. However, in this, as a comment to the story, the Park have made very clear that there have been no incidents of government interference. That's the Park's words, not mine.
Well, but again, I make the point only because it would appear that Kate Frame resisted them. She herself is saying that those are the remarks she received from this fellow Don McGillivray, who's the Deputy Director of Police Division of the Scottish Government, where, and I'll read you again, my perception of your remarks is of governmental interference with my independence. If this was the former Labour Liberal Democrat administration and something like this had happened, the SNP would be all over it like a rash, saying this is an absolutely outrageous interference.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I think it's important that we look at this story in the context of the days ahead. The policing subcommittee that I sit on will perhaps want to take a look at it. But what is very clear to me today is that when asked to react to this story, the Park have said that there have been no instances of government interference.
On the other issue at stake, Liam Kerr, which is about Michael Matheson, I'm not quite clear what your objections are to what he did. Are you saying that the substance of what he did, which was to stop the return of Phil Gormley, was okay? It's just the way it was done. Is that the point?
Well, I think it's interesting how you phrased that the substance of Michael Matheson did interfere to prevent the return of Phil Gormley. The situation...
But was that wrong?
The issue here is there is a meeting to which the independent chair of an independent body, the SPA, is called into unannounced between the Cabinet Secretary and the former SPA chair. This is a meeting that is unminuted. The former SPA chair goes in with a unanimous board decision we heard in committee just last week, saying the situation, Phil Gormley should be coming back to work. He emerges a short time later from an unminuted meeting with no notes, with an apparently different decision. And yet Mr. Matheson would have us believe that he didn't play any part in that decision.
Well, I mean, okay, but for all other people, this is just process. I mean, you seem to agree that he was right to interfere and stop Phil Gormley returning, or am I misunderstanding you?
Well, what you're misunderstanding, if I may, Gordon, is that this meeting, if Michael Matheson wished to interfere, then he can do that. He has power to do that. But what he doesn't have power to do is just to do it in a closed meeting without minutes,
so you are objecting to the
advice.
process, not the substance. Because Michael Matheson makes the point that if he hadn't intervened, given that people inside Police Scotland had not been made aware of the supposed return of Mr. Gormley, if he hadn't intervened, people like you would be screaming that this was appalling and that the SNP government was incompetent and that, of course, it was ministers' responsibility to stop a situation like this arising.
On the contrary, what is appalling is that if Mr. Matheson is now saying that he did intervene, which of course he previously didn't, he said he didn't, if he did intervene, then he has to go through an appropriate process. And that process involves not waiting, apart from anything else, for 9 weeks to come before Parliament and talk about what happened in that meeting.
What's your response to that, Ben McPherson? I mean, the time, I mean, again, I think this, he's not quite saying this, but I think the issue of substance is conceded here, but you presumably could concede the issue of process, that he should have, these meetings should have been minuted, that Mr. Matheson should have come to Parliament and told MSPs what was going on.
I think, first of all, it's important to recognise that there's an ongoing statutory investigation with the Park into these allegations. We should all be mindful of that. I think what's clear, and implicitly I think Liam Kerr's just admitted that, is that the Cabinet Secretary was absolutely right to ask the questions about the process in which the decision by the then SPA board on the 7th of November
Okay,
was made.
we get that.
But you concede the
hang on,
substance,
we don't have endless time. What about the point of process that Liam Kerr makes? That he should have told MSPs what was going on, and he should have made sure that minutes were taken of the meeting, because frankly, we've just got people's word for what happened.
Correct.
Well, what has happened this week in the Justice Committee and the Public Audit Committee is that, one, Andrew Flanagan has stated categorically that he didn't expect a minute to be taken. And also, in terms of correspondence from the Scottish Government, the Public Audit Committee has received correspondence from the Scottish Government detailing the fact that the follow-on correspondence that took place there after the meeting was much more substantial than any formal minute would have been.
All right, running out of time. Liam Kerr, coming back to this, these emails to and from Kate Frame, the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, what do you think should happen about this? What will you be asking for?
Well, I think first of all, the Cabinet Secretary needs to reflect very carefully on events of the last few months, and indeed the debate that took place in Parliament that I called on transparency and openness throughout government. So I'd expect that to be happening. I think there needs to be a full public inquiry into the SNP. I think the way Nicola Sturgeon's government is conducting itself is losing confidence from the public. It is losing
sorry, hang on.
confidence.
What do you want? You can't have a public inquiry into the fact you don't like the SNP government.
No,
that's silly.
Of course not, Gordon. I think we need a full inquiry into what is going on here.
You say a public inquiry. Do you mean a public inquiry into the relationship between ministers and these supposedly independent bodies? Is that what you're saying?
What we need is transparency, Gordon. There has been no transparency throughout this process. There has been no transparency from the Cabinet Secretary. The civil service...
OK, we get that. I'm still not quite sure I know what you want an inquiry into.
I want an inquiry into transparency. I want to know what's going on here. Because when we look at what's happening, as I alluded to earlier, John Swinney is currently facing allegations over bullying of independent witnesses on the named person inquiry.
OK, all right. Very briefly, Ben Macpherson, what do you want to happen specifically about this Kate Frame situation? Will your committee be doing anything about this?
That's a question for our committee to discuss.
What would you like them to do?
The new chair, John Finney, to take forward.
What would you like them to do?
I think that's not a question that I can answer at this point. But
you don't know what you'd like them to do?
Well, I think this is an important matter, and we've seen
this headline. It's so important that you don't know what to do about it.
We've seen a headline this morning, and now it's about how we consider this serious matter going forward, and no doubt the issue will be discussed in Parliament this week. But I think it's really important. There's obviously been a lot of sensationalism from Liam Kerr today. They lost a debate in Parliament this week on this issue. They've been proven wrong, and that it's been proven that the Cabinet Secretary was right to act the way he did. There's been absolute Tory hypocrisy on this issue. It's about time that they got behind our police service instead of using every opportunity to try and undermine them.
Right, I was just waiting for how long it would take for one of you to accuse the other of not backing the police, but you left it till the very end. We'll have to leave it there. Ben Macpherson, Liam Kerr, thank you both very much indeed. Now, since we recorded that interview, the Police Investigations and Review Commission have confirmed to the BBC that the emails are genuine. However, they insist that since the report came out as scheduled, there was no actual government interference. And in a statement, the Scottish Government said there have been no incidents of government interference, and the release of the audit document went ahead within the planned timescale. Now, since the SNP no longer has a Holyrood majority, they depend on support from at least one of the other parties to pass their budget. It was thought that would come from the Greens, but could the Liberal Democrats be about to outmanoeuvre them? Well, let's find out, because their leader, Willie Rennie, joins me now from Dundee. And I know you're down to talk about the budget, Willie Rennie, but let's just get your views on this police thing. Just to make one thing clear, the report, which is at the centre of these new allegations, was not actually about Phil Gormley. It was apparently about procedures in general terms to do with cases like Phil Gormley's, but didn't name him, just to make that clear. What do you make of these revelations this morning, and what do you think should be done about it?
Well, there's a pattern developing where we've got an overbearing government. It's developing an unhealthy culture of intervention. Now, for what it's worth, if I was in the Justice Secretary's position, I probably would have made the same call, because I think the circumstances around Phil Gormley's return weren't right. There wasn't proper welfare, there wasn't the notification of PERC or the acting chief constable. But that's not the centre of the problem here. We've got a concentration of power within the justice system. We've got the Justice Secretary, the Chair of the Police Authority and the Chief Constable. Those three positions held by just three people. We don't have that dispersed power, shared power across the country like we used to have.
But what about these specific allegations about Kate Frame, but about matters to do with Kate Frame?
Well, this is my point, is it's inevitable you get to circumstances like this because the power is concentrated in just three hands. That's why we need to change the system to disperse power so that the Justice Secretary isn't tempted in the way that inevitably has been on both of those issues. It's inappropriate to intervene in such cases without reporting it to Parliament, but it's inevitable that it happens because power is so close to the Justice Secretary. He can intervene so easily without telling Parliament, and that's why we need to have an independent review of how the police structure is operating. We believe it should change, power should be shared, and that will avoid these situations in the first place.
OK, another dancing on the head of a pin point to be made here. Of course, Michael Matheson and the Scottish Government say he didn't interfere in the return of Phil Gormley, but they, I think, would accept he intervened. So it's the difference between the two words. This case with Kate Frame and the attempt to delay the publication of a document, you said you accepted the substance of the intervention by Michael Matheson on the return of Phil Gormley. On this case, which looks to be an attempt to delay the publication of a document, would you accept on the substance of that case?
To be frank, Gordon, I've not seen all the detail yet. I need to look into it further before I can make a judgment on that. But I think it is a culture that's developing where the government seems too readily interfering and intervening in many cases like this.
Okay.
Even if they didn't actually interfere, they did try to. And I think that's the kind of questions that we need to be asking. I think there should be a statement to Parliament this coming week on this issue because a culture is developing and we need to put an end to it.
The budget. Everyone thought Patrick Harvie and the Greens would gallop to the government's rescue. Are you getting hooved up to gallop instead?
Well, the talks between myself and Derek Mackay broke down before Christmas on a very important issue for the Northern Isles over the internal ferry services, because it was a promise that they had made to fund the services to avoid massive cuts to the Lifeline services or to public services. They withdrew that commitment that they had made over many, many years and then tried to lever us in, strong-arm us into voting for the budget. It was a breakdown of trust, so we broke down the talks as a result of that. Now, there's still time to repair the damage that was done. We could talk to the government. There's still time left before we finalise the budget and agree the budget. And we've got priorities on mental health and education that I've explained to you before about.
But is this issue of the ferries your red line issue? Are you saying if they conceded the point on that, you could vote for them?
That is not the only issue we're arguing for, but it was such an important issue in the way that they handled it, broke down the trust between ourselves and them that we'd had in previous years. And therefore, it was a precondition before any talks with the government was that they followed through.
But do you have any red lines beyond that? Because on the face of it, what you're saying is a much more modest demand than the demands that were made by Patrick Harvie about, effectively about £200 million worth of restoration of cuts to councils, which he alleges is happening.
It was a precondition for further talks about the big issues that we've been arguing for, about investment in mental health, bringing the investment up to £1.2 billion, but also a £500 million investment in education for schools, nurseries and colleges. Those have been our priorities set out in our manifesto.
But they're not red
in
lines.
2016. Well, I mean, what's a red line, Gordon? We put up these issues for discussion and debate. We couldn't quite reach agreement last year. I would hope we might be able to reach agreement this year. They've moved some way on tax, which has raised more revenue. They've not spent the money in the way that we would have liked. I think there's major problems with the nursery education
programme. I'm slightly chuckling here. I'm just your phrase what's a red line would be said by many cynics to sum up the history of the Liberal Democrats over the past decade.
Yeah, but Gordon, what I'm explaining here is the kind of things we would like to see. Now, obviously, we're not the biggest party in Parliament, so we can't demand everything that we want. But we've put forward very clearly and coherently a package of proposals to transform the education system, to invest in that system to boost the economy, because the economy's been struggling in recent months following the Brexit vote. We need to make that investment to turn around the economy, but we also need to invest in mental health. Those are the things we'll be arguing for.
You had a bit of a clash with Nicola Sturgeon, didn't you, at First Minister's Questions? You appear to be accusing her of lying. There was a bit of a bad-tempered exchanges. Would you like to withdraw that allegation?
Look, I accept what the presiding officer has said about the use of language in the Parliament, but you can understand my frustration, my strong feelings on this issue, when the First Minister, in a debate that I was part of back in 2016, when she gave assurance to the questioner that she would be standing up for the children's ward in Paisley, when she knew fine well that it was a matter of discussion and debate within the Health Board and the community, she said to the questioner, there are no proposals. Now, that's a politician's answer. She was dodging it, and she got a round of applause at the end of her question, of her answer, because the audience were convinced she was going to stand up for the ward. Now, I think it's inappropriate now to claim it's the doctors that forced her to make this decision. She was standing up then, and I therefore think that what she said back then was misleading the parents of sick kids in Paisley. That's why I felt so strongly about the issue.
Right, but really that's just a difference of words. You've swapped the word lying for the word misleading.
Well, I mean, the presiding officer's given a ruling on what's appropriate in the Parliament, and you know, I think you know what I mean, and you know how strongly I feel about this issue.
So you're not withdrawing what you said?
Well, I've written to the presiding officer. I've made it clear that I accept his judgment about the language, but I do feel incredibly strongly about this issue because the presiding officer and the First Minister did mislead the people of Paisley into believing she was going to stand up for that ward. And I think those issues of integrity are incredibly important.
Now, this is the bit where you get to put on your best big smile. There has been a poll saying people want another referendum on the EU.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, fantastic.
Have you got anyway? You keep coming on and telling us you're trying to have the discussions with the Scottish Government or the SNP to get them to back your position on having another referendum. Have you had any meetings? Have you got anywhere?
Tavish Scott did have a meeting with Mike Russell before, and they kind of sat on the fence a bit, and they're still sitting on the fence. I would rather they came off that fence and backed what I think is a growing popular position to have a say on the final outcome of the Brexit deal. I think it would be sensible for them to do that. I suspect they're a bit too attracted to having another independent referendum rather than backing our proposal. But our proposal is the one that will win.
If polls in Scotland swing towards people saying they want another independence referendum, we'll have the same big smile from you and you'll say, yes, bring it on.
I think we rejected a bad deal 3 years ago in independence. I don't think we'll have another shot at it.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, Willie Rennie. Thank you very much indeed. Now, as local authorities across Scotland battle to balance their books, is it inevitable that arts and culture will lose out? Stirling Council published dozens of proposals this week aimed at saving around £20 million over the next 5 years. Among the projects facing funding cuts are the city's museum and a children's orchestra. The council is encouraging people to get involved in its consultation before any final decisions are made next month. Katie Hunter reports.
1, 2, 3. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. These women find sunshine singing in the Stirling Smith Museum, but the facility's funding could be cut. Dr. Veronica McBurney believes singing, no matter where, is good for people's health.
Cutting the arts is a big mistake. It's a huge mistake because the arts give us pleasure and they encourage creativity. And if we don't have that, the human spirit just shrivels up. And I really am fed up sending people to psychology departments and signing them off for stress and trying to offer them some help without actually saying, look, let's get back to the basics. The first humans to survive, if you look at Darwin, were those who communicated through song.
The Stirling Smith could lose almost £250,000 of council funding over the next 5 years.
It was literally a big bloodbath in the street, in Broad Street.
The museum tells many stories of Stirling's bloody past. Now it faces a financial fight for its future.
Everything that has made Stirling Stirling is here. The famous Stirling jug, the world's oldest football, the world's oldest curling stone, the collections relating to Wallace and Bruce and the Wars of Independence, you name it, we have it. If it's about Stirling, it's in here. And the loss to the city will be enormous. Who has ever heard of a city without a museum?
It isn't just the city's museum facing cultural cuts. This is the Ratlock Estate, home to a project which aims to transform children's lives through music. Big Noise has been behind major concerts in Scotland and abroad. It's modelled on a Venezuelan scheme and works in some of Scotland's most deprived communities. The Ratlock project could lose more than £200,000 of funding by 2023, a worrying prospect for families who take part.
She's very musical. She enjoys it, very much so. I think it's something that she can do with friends as well. It builds her. Hannah's quite a shy little girl when she wants to be, while we add that bit in. It brings her out of her shell. She's quite energetic and quite, I wouldn't go as far as to say loud, but you're very vocal when you come to Big Noise, aren't you? She enjoys it.
What is it you like about playing the cello? Why do you like it?
Because I didn't want a E string, so I picked the cello because it's got a C instead of E.
And can you tell me, have you played in any concerts, or what kind of things have you played in?
I've played in a couple, some, and one of them I had there was all Big Noise playing in their groups on stage.
Is that the one at the Albert Hall?
Yeah.
Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
She played at the Albert Hall?
Yeah.
Wow.
Stirling Council needs to save around £20 million over the next 5 years. It's set out dozens of areas which could be cut, and final decisions will be made next month. The groups we spoke to were sympathetic about the challenges the authority faces. The council leader is adamant neither the Stirling Smith nor Big Noise will ultimately have to close their doors.
Arts and culture are extremely important to Stirling, and we are, as an administration, committed to maintaining a rich offering of arts and culture in the city as we move forward. What we do have to look at is we need to look at are there any potential efficiencies? Is there any potential to increase income? Is there ways that we can actually improve the financial model so that the council becomes less exposed and we can create a more sustainable model in terms of arts and culture as we move forward.
You make me happy.
Back at the Stirling Smith, the singers have moved into the sunshine. And, to coin a cliché, they've made the song their own.
Please don't take our Smith away.
Now it's time to take a look back over events and forwards to those looming in the week ahead. Well, I'm joined now by the two journalists and broadcasters, David Torrance and Leslie Riddick. Well, let's start with these new allegations about the police. David Torrance, I mean, the Scottish Government insisting no actual interference happened, but does that really get them off the hook? Because on the face of it, the emails show they tried to interfere. And if there's credit here, it's to the Police Investigation Commissioner for standing up to it.
Absolutely. I mean, the Scottish Government line on this, that there was no interference actually taking place, spectacularly misses the point. As the emails clearly show, there was an attempt there from this senior civil servant, Don McGilvray. Not the first time he's been in the news, incidentally. And as you say, the Commissioner said a clear no to that attempt. An attempt, as ever, to influence the timescale, not so much the conclusions. But it's yet another example of civil servants, I would argue, going beyond their remit and behaving quite politically.
Why do they do things like this? Wouldn't it be better just not to bother? I mean, the report came out and there wasn't really that much of a fuss about it, was there?
Yeah, I actually bothered to look back at what the complaints audit eventually said, and it baffles me actually about journalism in Scotland sometimes that we end up getting so hung up on these particular personal details when really there's some substantial points in that.
Yeah.
You know, that there was kind of not enough explanation on how the SPA, this is the folk that are meant to be the watchdog, effectively, for the police or, you know, the standards authority, but there's no information and not enough explanation of how they reach decisions. The average time to resolve something is excessive. The public having to produce evidence regarding complaints is not appropriate, and there's no SPA guidance about whistleblowing. I mean, that would worry me as a kind of, you know, that's the framing up of our police system.
Would you also, I mean, David's point is that there clearly was, on the face of it, and we now know these emails are genuine, an attempt by the Scottish Government to say, look, could you not just delay this a wee bit?
Yes. I mean, having looked at that, what they seem to be suggesting was you could actually find a different way that's less public to resolve this instead of publishing this before the big investigation that's going on into the Chief Constable. I don't know whether that really washes very well, but I also don't know how long this interest in the quite pernickety business of the details of timing will continue. I don't know that Michael Matheson's JCA is yet on a sugary peg.
What is the case, though, is that this seems to be dragging on forever. I mean, there's just now a big row surrounding Police Scotland.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, that doesn't affect policing on a day-to-day level, but surely this has to be sorted out pretty quickly.
It does. I mean, having written a couple of articles about Police Scotland myself, where there's considerable worry about the control rooms not responding properly to urgent calls. There's all sorts of worries about 40 to 50 police stations being closed. The fact that Police Scotland is over-centralised, and I completely agree with Willie Rennie on this one, there is not the underpinning of any local accountability. The councillor used to be able to be the one that hired and fired chief constables. Now they're way beyond reach, and that system is one that the Scottish Government set up. A lot of police on the beat want to see it broken back up into 3 or 4 units.
David, Leslie mentioned Willie Rennie there. Could he gallop to the rescue in the Scottish budget? Because the significance of what he was saying was, on the face of it, his demands actually look rather more moderate than the demands that, I think it was last Sunday, Patrick Harvey was in this programme, basically demanding hundreds of millions, tens of millions of pounds. It was less clear that Willie Rennie's demanding that.
Yeah, it was quite clear that in that interview that Willie Rennie was trying to keep the negotiations going on that front. And I suspect he's pushing at an open door. I've spoken to some SNP MSPs over the past few weeks, and one used the phrase about finding a new dance partner, which I thought was quite amusing, in relation to those budget negotiations. And a lot of nationalists find the Greens quite tricky to deal with. And I think Willie Rennie's probably aware of that. But the interesting thing is that it's a reminder that this is a minority government, and this often gets overlooked. And of course, in the first term, the SNP's first term back in 2007, this sort of dance took place quite frequently over the budget negotiations.
Euro referendum, there was that poll. Jeremy Corbyn this morning on television was absolutely adamant that Labour will knock back another poll.
Yeah, and that the poll, which was showing that there's a majority for a second referendum, actually, when they broke it down, Labour voters, young people and Scots are the 3 groups whose support for Remain has increased. Yeah. So, although...
It also, I think, showed that there might be a tiny majority for Remain.
Yes.
But certainly not enough that couldn't be changed in the course of the campaign.
Yeah, but the thing that's in it, I did actually write something about this myself, saying to Nicola Sturgeon, don't go for a second referendum, because the point is, this was an advisory referendum. Every time that a referendum takes the place of parliamentary sovereignty, you weaken an already weakened idea in British politics. The MPs need to stand up and do something here. And actually, you look at the Midlands, you look at the big areas that were Leave, you look at Wales, it's still Leave, it's not changed.
Briefly, David, I mean, if Jeremy Corbyn's saying no and the Conservatives saying no, it's not a runner, is it?
And the SNP have sort of made noises in favour of it, but they've still not gone quite as far as backing.
No, Willie Rennie's meetings don't seem to be getting terribly far, do they?
Indeed. I think the point is salience. Sure, the figures show a shift. I wonder how strongly voters actually feel about the idea of a second referendum.
Do you mean as they rank it?
Yeah.
You know, other things like the NHS, for example, are much more important.
Indeed. Pushed to state of view, they will say, yes, I want one. Do they actually feel very strongly about it? I suspect not.
All right, Luke, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed. That's all for this week. I'll be back on Wednesday with Politics Scotland. Until then, from all of us in the programme, goodbye.